I welcome all of you to this second module of this course. Today we're looking at the prerequisites, the stages and dimensions of development planning. This is what we'll be talking about in this module. Now, this particular module look at the what do we need to consider, the essential components when we're doing development planning. We're looking at the essential requirements for successful development planning and the policy measures and the complement of resources that ought to be put in place to have a hitch-free and effective planning process. This is what we'll be considering in this module, including the availability of longitudinal data, the presence of core institutional capacity, and the provision of enabling governance arrangements. So this is the area we'll be covering. And we'll also look at the role and the place of long-term national visions in conceptualizing and building a development plan. So in a nutshell, if looking at the various components, the prerequisites of planning, which we'll consider in this module, there are 6 of them. First, we'll look at the human resource and institutional capacity that are required in the planning process. The issue of data is important. Data availability. We'll talk about data availability because it's an essential component. If you don't have good information and ensure that the data that will be required are available, then you can do a successful planning. Then the planning also is not going to be top-down. You have to engage with the citizens. So we consider citizens engagement. What we need to do, what we need to put in place for effective citizens engagement. Number 4 is the need for a vibrant planning organization. The organization that we coordinate, that we work and make sure and steer the process, we need to identify and put it in place. Of course, we need money, funding resources. We need to identify the sources of funds and all the stakeholders, where the agencies, where we get the money, we need to identify them. And number 6 is enabling governance environment that to make the whole process work. We need to ensure that. Now, let's go to the stages of planning. Sequentially, what are the steps we're going to take? We say, okay, we want to embark on planning. What do we do? What are the various stages in the planning cycle? We identify 6 main steps to be taken, the 6 stages. First, you have to define your objectives. Look at your country, you're doing development planning, you have to identify a goal and get the specific objectives. What do you want to achieve at the end of the plan period? You have to lay it out and it has to be agreed upon. Then you articulate the strategies that will enable you to achieve these objectives. And these strategies, you look at it, you see various alternatives, and select the best for you. Identify those priorities. So these priorities are very important. Set the machinery in motion, identify your priorities, look at the alternatives, and vis-a-vis the resources that are available to you, and also the objectives you want to achieve. So these resources, like mentioned, consider them. Then you have a plan for the tasks, the implementation procedure. How to set out and work out the plan until you get your document. Of course, you look at the tracking and evaluation methods. You have to put that one in place. So these are the various stages you pass through in that cycle. Now let's go to the issue of dimensions of development planning. There are different dimensions, and these have evolved over time. We consider them how the pieces, the making of an integrated development plan that speaks to sectoral, strategic, decentralized, centralized. We will consider all of them. And we'll look at also regional dimensions, physical, territorial planning, and so on. So in considering these dimensions of development planning, we'll look at the typology of development plans first. Look at the typology. In terms of typology, we have a variety of them. But three, we'll concern ourselves with three here clearly. We look at the temporal dimension, that is the planning horizons. And in this case, we want to see whether we're talking about annual plan or medium term plan, or even a long-term plan, perspective plan. So this question, the planning horizons. So we have to know what stage we are. Are we doing an annual plan? Are we doing medium-term plan? Or is it a long-term plan? So this is one dimension of it. The second dimension is the governance in terms of jurisdiction of who is doing the plan. Is it a centralized system of government, or is this a decentralized system of government? We'll talk briefly about this shortly. Then the scope can have a scope dimension. Is it a national plan? Is it a continental plan? Or is it a regional plan? As far as we are concerned now, we're in Gambia. We're talking about Gambia. Now we'll be looking at national plan. But you should also realize that for you to have the knowledge that the plan can also be regional, and it can even be continental. But as far as we are concerned, in the case of Gambia, now we are much interested in a national plan. Then in terms of the plan horizon, I've mentioned before, you have your annual plan, then you have your medium-term plan, and you have your perspective plans. The medium-term plan usually is for a period of 5 years. And if, for example, of Gambia, the one we discussed in the first module, the Gambian plan of 2018 to 2021, we talk about other plans, 1975 to 80. Usually is medium-term plan in general is in the area of like 5 years. There's sufficient time that to enable you to achieve the objectives that you have set out during the formation of the plan. So this is important. Then the perspective plan or long-term plans, it can be 20 years, 30 years. You look at the 2060 agenda and so on. It can be 20 years, can be 30 years. So we're in the realm of long-term plans when we're getting to 20 years or 30 years. Now, in terms of jurisdiction, which I mentioned, whether centralized or decentralized, we can also have subnational jurisdictions. In that case, they play a more limited role in the design and implementation of national development plans. If I give examples, for example, Cape Verde and Ethiopia are good examples of countries in which implementation was highly centralized. We're talking about centralized and decentralized in the early stages of development planning. But later on, we learn a more decentralized system is better. But so in those countries, it later became more decentralized. Nigeria is a good example of a country with a longer tradition of decentralized planning, where ministries, departments, and agencies work through key functions to implement plans in a federal context. You know, in Africa, really, only very few countries are federal. Ethiopia is federal, Nigeria is federal, and so on. But sometimes you have the political structure itself is rather unitary in many places, but you can see devolve power to lower level jurisdictions. But all these plans anyway, there are various levels of functionality and effectiveness. Even, you know, when you look at various, whether it's centralized or decentralized. But decentralized system is often viewed in 3 dimensions. You know, as we're looking at decentralization, sometimes we use it, it's a general word, you decentralize, but there are three dimensions of this itself. When you talk about decentralization, you might be talking about the concentration or just delegation. And the third dimension is devolution. Decentralization, in Gambia, if you apply this to Gambia, these three dimensions, whether you're talking about deconcentration, talking about delegation, or devolution, if viewed in the context of Gambia, which are concerned here, and which will be of interest to you, you find out decentralization in the Gambia has received considerable policy attention, especially in recent development planning agenda. The 1997 Constitution of the Gambia provides for decentralization by devolution of some central government functions to local governments, and this is the most functional aspect of decentralization actually. And so Gambia is looking at this, taking the devolution dimension. And these constitutional provisions led to the enabling policy and legal framework on local government reform in the Gambia, and it's also to the enactment of the Local Government Act of 2002, the Local Government Staff Service Rules of 2003, the Local Government Finance and Audit Act of 2004, and the Decentralization Policy of 2007. These are institutional and legislative procedure to entrench devolution and decentralization in the Gambia. There's also the Local Government Service Commission regulation in recent time, way back in 2010. Now, if you look at the governance and decentralization policy in the Gambia, the objectives are spelled out. In 1980, most of these objectives decided to unfold, and they were to give communities a more inclusive role on the utilization and management of local resources. And this has undoubtedly increased participation and enhanced accountability of decision makers to the public in the Gambia. The decentralization agenda extends the process of democratization to the local levels and promotes a community-based approach to development, including assistance to migrants, especially youth returning to the Gambia. Now, so much about the dimensions. Let's look at the scope dimensions. Look at governance dimension and so on. In terms of scope, typology, we have continental development priorities. For example, priorities at the continental level can include agriculture, food security and rural development. Another priority, we have almost like priority areas, about 8 priority areas, if we're talking about the scope of the continental development priorities. We have human capital development, which involves health, nutrition, science, technology, and innovation-driven education. There is the social development dimension, in which case we place emphasis on social protection, access, participation, and advancement of women, youth, the marginalized, and the vulnerable to economic, social, and governance opportunities. That's social development is very important. Then there's the industrialization aspect, industrial policy framework, mechanisms, value additions to agricultural outputs, increased control of natural resources, employment generating, manufacturing, and so on. These are the components of the industrialization dimension when we talk about development planning. Now, integration, free movement of people, goods, services, and capital, common monetary union, infrastructure, interconnectivity. So at the continental development planning level, these are the various priorities I'm talking about. But governance is also important. Political governance, capable nations, democratic nations, issue of human rights, constitutionalism, and the rule of law are key areas, to be emphasized when talking about the continental planning. Of course, peace and security is very, very important to achieve the objectives at that level. And when we talk about integration, if you look at the example of Gambia, and you can see how even your national plan, sometimes you want to align it with some of the continental priorities. You want to align it with some of your continental priorities. And this has been demonstrated in the roadmap. And if you look at the roadmap, you can see the connections, how a national development plan here is integrated with the what the 2030 agenda, then agenda 2063, for Africa, agenda 23 at continental level, and the SDG, for example, having some of the targets up to 2030. You can see in this how in the 2018 to 2021 National Development Plan of Gambia, how this has been integrated, and some of these frameworks have been applied to really take care of some of the continental priorities as they also go about to articulate and implement the national plan of the Gambia. Now, if you look at the regional development priorities, we've just talked about continental development priorities when we're looking at the dimensions in terms of scope. Now, let's come to regional development priorities. At the regional level, we have some examples. The Abuja Treaty, for example, called for a regional integration approach aimed at the establishment of African Economic Community. This has been part of the trends, how regional development priorities has evolved in no distant past. In a bid to accelerate the integration agenda, the SALT Declaration of 1999 resulted in the Minimum Integration Program. And this program, the MIP, provides a common denominator for all regional economic communities, ECOWAS and all that, albeit with the virtues of variable geometry, allowing the regional economic communities to develop at different paces. Even when there's this provision that the RECs, ECOWAS, and so on in Africa can develop at their paces, that something must bring them together. There's this minimum integration program that is entrenched into that at the SALT Declaration of 1999. Now let's come to national development planning, which is the area where we are when actually we're talking about development planning in Gambia. The national development plans are periodical development plans, normally covering a period of 5 years, like I mentioned before, and setting out major development objectives. And here, if we want to look at the priorities, we've considered the priorities at the continental level, we've considered the priorities at the regional level. Now, we are looking at the priorities at the national level. So where are the areas of emphasis? Where are you going to allocate the resources? What will be the priority projects and policies? And here we have, especially in the case of, we have identified 8 areas, 6 priority areas that you need to focus attention on. First is inclusive economic growth and wealth creation, human capital development, and good governance, including the building of a capable state reform of the public sector. That is the second area of priority. Another area of priority is employment creation. The fourth one is social protection for the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. The fifth area of priority deals with infrastructure, and this is widespread. We have water, energy, transport, infrastructure. We have information technology. We have science and technology innovation, and sustainable development. And lastly, but not the least, is the issue of peace and security, culture, sports, and arts. Peace and security is very important for national development. So as you set out this agenda, you must be able to create an enabling environment where all the objectives you have set out and the strategies and what projects you want to implement work seamlessly to enable you to achieve the objectives. These priority areas also reflect, in the case of Gambia, in the last 2018-2021 plan. Specifically, there's considerable emphasis on the restoration of good governance, respect for human rights, the rule of law, there's empowering the citizen through decentralization and the local governance. There are other key priority areas which must emphasize here. For example, in the case of Gambia, stimulating economic growth. They modernize agriculture, fishery for sustained economic growth, food and nutrition, security, and poverty reduction. It's an important area to be emphasized in Gambia. The third area is investing in human capital through improved education and health services, as well as social protection. Then building infrastructure in energy, transport, and public works, and promoting inclusive and culture-centered tourism. Now, another dimension we want to consider is what we call sectoral plan. You can have a national plan, comprehensive one, that touches all these priority areas I've mentioned. Also, you must not forget, we can have various sectors having its own plan. You can set out plan for a particular sector, well-focused and sector-based. And you must know that the presence of a national economic development plan does not preclude the existence of sectoral plans. They are not alternatives. It's not that, oh, when you are doing sectoral plan, there's no need for national development. Or have your own national development plan document doesn't mean that you cannot focus specifically on a particular sector and then see what development efforts can be concentrated in that effort. More often than not, the existence of the National Development Plan is highly welcome because it will really reflect and will have identified the direction that you need to go in that particular sector, which means the sectoral plans will be a derivative of the national plan. In Nigeria, for example, there are sectoral plans, especially for agriculture and industrial sectors, exemplified by for example, the currently we have the agricultural promotion plan, then the green, which we call the green alternative, 2015 to 2019. And we also have the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan, 2014 to 2019. These are examples of sectoral plans. In the Gambia, we also have an example. In fact, Gambia is one of the leading African countries in the preparation of national agricultural investment plans. Under the CADEP, Comprehensive African Agriculture Program, it is part of the strategies that countries must adopt to achieve the regional targets set for agricultural financing. You know, for example, you have to use 10% of your public expenditure must go to agriculture in terms of funding. And in Gambia, they have the Gambia National Agricultural Investment Plan of 2011 to 2015, which focus on the performance, targets, coordination, communication, and capacity building. So Gambia already has an experience in this in terms of sectoral planning, which we can give agriculture. And you can see right from the immediate post-colonial period, Gambia has focused on agriculture, groundnut, and so on, which is the major export commodity at that time. And so since then, they've been developing the agriculture. And so it is not surprising that when it was time to start to develop the National Agricultural Investment Plan, there's the 2011 to 2015 one, which Gambia put in place. So this is where we would stop. We've covered the prerequisites, the various stages, and then the dimensions of planning. One thing I need to clarify here is that these modules are not discrete in itself. Most of the points that are raised here, because they belong to this module, when we get to other module, there can be further expansion. And then we have arranged it so that you can gain an understanding and advance your knowledge as we move along. So some of the things we raise here sometimes may come up in other modules, but we put them where the bulk of the what we need to share in terms of experience and what you need to understand and what you need to know. We focus it on specific modules, but then the knowledge must flow through the 6 modules we have. There are exercises which in the practical sessions later on, we are going to take up these exercises to really understand that you are following, and then to also track your understanding of what we are saying, so that we can have ideas to share and then discuss these exercises. So thank you very much.